Hi, and welcome back. Today we're going to take a look at asset hierarchy, look a little bit about how to build that and what a parent-child relationship looks like. So your CMMS or EAM system has either asset or equipment records that exist. And on those equipment records, you can attach all kinds of things. You can make them trigger PMs. You can tie them to work orders. Essentially, these are the things you're trying to track from a financial perspective and from a downtime and incident rate and failure rate perspective. So on the asset or equipment record, there's lots of information like model number, serial number, classification attributes, all types of things tied to that. So in your CMMS, this is kind of the bread and butter. Your location and asset hierarchy is centric to executing all the transactions that go around it, such as work orders and PMs and job plans and all the things that attach to it. So first and foremost, we've got to define what an asset is inside your CMMS or your EAM, because this can get really granular depending on what it is you want to track. So for example, let's say you have a water distribution skid, and on that water distribution skid, there's a whole bunch of valves. Do you want the valves inside your CMMS or EAM? Well, that really depends on how big the valves are and whether or not you need to track them as assets. And so we can't really define that clearly just by saying all ball valves don't go in a system. So what I like to define as an asset is something that I can replace the parts on in order to restore to base condition. If my only option is to throw it out and replace it in whole, or if that's my strategy, I consider that a spare part. So what we like to do for defining an asset essentially is ask yourself the question, will I repair it or replace it? So first question is, will I repair it or replace it? The second question really is, will I track costs and reliability? Will you track costs and reliability down to it? If the answer to these questions is it's replace, and I don't plan, if it's replace, it's not an asset, that's a spare part. If it's repair, then we move to question B, which is, will I want to track the costs and reliability against that? If the answer to that question is no, it's a spare part. So define your asset. Then we've got to collect our data. So this can happen in a couple of ways. You can hire an organization to come in and just do a mass walk and collect the information for you. Or essentially, as you're sending folks out to do PMs, if the hierarchy is just not that clean and you want to redo it, but you already have a PM structure in place, you can send folks when they do their next iteration of PMs with a data collection sheet and ask them to collect the information on the asset or equipment. So things such as, what's on a motor, the frame size, horsepower, service factor, that type of stuff. Anything that's an attribute type data, you want to try to collect. You're then going to create your parent-child hierarchy, and if you don't know what a parent-child hierarchy is, we're going to go through that in just a second. Once you build that either in Excel or directly into the CMMS system, so if you build it in Excel, your next step is either to input it or upload it into your CMMS system, depending on the functionality of your CMMS/EAM. But essentially, the parent-child relationship builds the structure to which you will drill down to write work orders. And so if we take a quick example of an air handler here. So we've got air handler 1. Air handler 1 happens to have two supply fans, fan 1A and fan 1B. Each one of those supply fans has a nice 125 horsepower motor. So because it's that size and I'm going to repair it or send it out for repair or replace bearings in it, I consider it an asset or a piece of equipment. And so it's in the system. And the VFD for that as well. Now the return fan, depending on the size of the return fan, you may say that the motor and the fan itself is just throwaway. We're going to replace it. There's not really work to do on it. Maybe you do on the fan, but not the motor. So you don't list the motor. The motor's a throwaway. It's a replace. So it's a spare part. If the motor is of adequate size that you would send it out for rewind or do work to it yourself, you would list the motor. If not, spare part. So essentially, this is how the structure of a parent-child relationship works. So once all that is built into the system, you then have to input it into the CMMS or do mass upload. And as I said, your CMMS functionality may vary. So essentially, this is a really quick overview of what an asset hierarchy is, how to determine what an asset is, and essentially what the steps are to get it into your system.